It was another uneventful afternoon. I stood at the kitchen sink, my hands immersed in the warmth of soapy water, absent-mindedly scrubbing a plate. The rhythmic clatter of dishes against the porcelain sink was almost soothing, a mindless task that allowed my mind to wander. And then I heard it. A low, ominous moan from beneath the sink, a sound so strange it made me stop, my hands frozen in the water. Before I could even register what was happening, a violent burst of water exploded from the pipes, a pressurized jet spraying in every direction like an untamed geyser. A startled scream escaped my lips as I stumbled back, my hands flailing in a vain attempt to shield myself. But it was too late. Cold water drenched me instantly, soaking through my thin blouse until it clung uncomfortably to my skin. The fabric clung to me like a second layer, sending shivers down my spine. Within seconds, the kitchen floor had turned into a miniature lake, the water spreading rapidly across the tiles, slipping into every crack and creeping dangerously close to the cabinets. "Oh, for the love of—" I muttered in frustration, grabbing the nearest towel and pressing it against the spewing pipe. A useless effort. It was like trying to stop a flood with a napkin. Nathan was at work, and as much as I hated to admit it, I had no idea how to fix this mess on my own. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, my fingers slipping across the damp screen as I frantically searched for a solution. A list of emergency plumbers popped up, and my eyes landed on the first option. ProFlow Plumbing, fast, reliable, and always available. Without hesitation, I hit the call button. I paced the flooded kitchen, my bare feet splashing on the cold tile floor. My heart pounded in sync with the ringing of the phone, each second stretching unbearably long. Finally, a bright and cheerful voice answered, "ProFlow Plumbing, this is Melanie. How can we help you today?" "Yes, hi," I exhaled, my breath coming out unevenly. "My kitchen plumbing just burst and there's water everywhere." "That sounds like a real mess, but don't worry, we've got you covered. Can I have your address?" I rattled off my details as quickly as I could, and relief washed over me when she assured me that a technician was already on his way. "Someone should be there within the hour," she promised. I barely had time to process her words before the doorbell rang exactly 15 minutes later. I hurried down the hall, my soaked feet leaving prints on the floor. As I reached the door, my pulse quickened, not just from urgency, but from the sheer chaos of the situation. I pulled it open, expecting a gruff, middle-aged repairman with tired eyes and oil-stained overalls. Instead, I found myself momentarily frozen in place. The man standing before me was not what I had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly composed, he exuded a quiet strength. His deep hazel eyes held an unreadable intensity, his dark curls slightly damp from what must have been the humid evening air. His uniform, a fitted charcoal shirt with ProFlow plumbing stitched neatly across the chest, did little to hide the solid muscles beneath. A sturdy toolbox dangled from one hand, the veins along his forearm subtly visible. "Evening, ma'am," he said softly, his voice deep and rich. "I'm Lucas. You called about a burst pipe?" For a moment, I forgot how to speak. Yes, I stammered, forcing myself to blink and snap out of my trance. His lips curled into a barely concealed grin as he held out a hand, rough and calloused from years of work. I shook it, my fingers briefly caught in its firm grip. "I'm Evelyn. Please come in. The kitchen is an absolute disaster." Lucas stepped inside, his heavy boots making a soft crunch on the wet tile. And then I became painfully aware of myself, my damp blouse clinging stubbornly to my skin, my wild, disheveled hair, and my bare feet. Toes painted a chipped, deep red. I crossed my arms over my chest, suddenly feeling far more exposed than I had moments before. "Damn," Lucas muttered, crouching down to inspect the mess under the sink. "That's some serious damage." I swallowed hard and nodded, but my focus had already begun to shift. As he worked, his forearms flexed under the tight fabric of his uniform, the muscles moving fluidly with each movement. His strong, capable hands traced the corroded pipe, fingers running along the rusted edges as he examined the extent of the break. "Can you fix it?" I asked, my voice lower than I had intended. He glanced over his shoulder, his lips curling into something between a smirk and a knowing smile. "I can certainly try, but this pipe is in bad shape. Corrosion's eaten away most of it. It'll take some time." I leaned back against the counter and crossed my arms, pretending to be unfazed by the way his presence unsettled me. "Take as much time as you need," I murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." Lucas nodded, setting his toolbox down with a heavy thud, the metallic clang ringing out through the kitchen. With effortless precision, he began unpacking his tools, moving with a quiet confidence that made it impossible not to watch him. His hands, steady and deliberate, worked quickly as he loosened a bolt, the sharp scrape of metal against metal filling the silence between us. A flutter of something warm stirred deep in my stomach, something I hadn't felt in longer than I cared to admit. I needed a distraction, anything to break the spell that seemed to be weaving itself around me. "Can I get you something to drink?" I blurted out suddenly. "A beer, maybe?" "You look like you've had a long day." Lucas hesitated mid-motion, his hands pausing just briefly before he lifted his head. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "I'm still on the clock, ma'am." His voice was polite, professional. I waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, please call me Evelyn, and one beer won't hurt. It's hot out there today." There was a flicker of something in his gaze. Consideration, hesitation, or perhaps something else entirely. Then, after a brief pause, he nodded. "All right, Evelyn. A beer would be nice. Thanks." A slow, inexplicable thrill ran through me as I turned toward the fridge. I grabbed a cold bottle, the condensation cool against my palm, and popped the cap off effortlessly. When I handed it to him, our fingers brushed. Just a fleeting touch, nothing more than a passing moment, but it was enough to send a small, unexpected jolt of awareness through me. I leaned against the counter, my own drink in hand, watching as he returned to his work. But this time I wasn't just watching him fix the pipe. I was watching him. "So, Lucas," I said after a moment, deliberately drawing out his name, letting it roll off my tongue slowly. "How long have you been a plumber?" He didn't look up immediately, but I saw the faintest trace of amusement tug at the corner of his lips. "About 5 years now," he answered, finally glancing at me with a small, easy half-smile. "Started as an apprentice right after high school. Been at it ever since." "That's impressive," I mused, tilting my head as I observed him. "You're young to have that much experience." He shrugged, his attention shifting back to the pipes. "I've always been good with my hands." The statement hung in the air between us, heavy with unintended meaning, or perhaps not so unintended at all. A slow, unexpected warmth crept up my neck. I cleared my throat, but my voice still came out softer than I intended. "I can see that." Lucas stilled for a fraction of a second before turning his head to meet my gaze. Something flickered in his hazel eyes, something unreadable, something simmering just beneath the surface. I held his stare, unblinking, the corner of my lips curving into the ghost of a smile. The atmosphere shifted, subtle yet undeniable. A current of unspoken tension passed between us, thick enough to press against my skin. The kitchen, though flooded, suddenly felt much too warm. Lucas broke the moment first, clearing his throat as he turned back to his work. But I noticed the tension in his shoulders now, the way his grip on the wrench tightened slightly. His movements, which had been confident and smooth just minutes ago, now held a fraction of hesitation. He was affected by me, and I liked it, perhaps a little too much. I took the last sip of my beer, the coolness doing nothing to temper the heat rising within me. As I reached for another, I made sure to lean forward just a little more than necessary, just enough to let my blouse shift slightly, fabric slipping ever so slightly against my skin. It was subtle, but not subtle enough. I heard it, the sharp inhale, the barely there hitch in his breath. "Something wrong?" I asked, my voice smooth, feigning innocence. Lucas swallowed hard, shaking his head quickly. "No, ma'am, just be careful. The floor's still wet." I smiled, slow and knowing, taking a deliberate sip of my drink. "Oh, don't worry," I murmured. "I'm always careful, Lucas." A pause, a calculated beat of silence. "But," I added, tilting my head just slightly, "sometimes accidents happen." The flush that crept up his neck told me everything I needed to know. I had him exactly where I wanted him. For a while, Lucas worked without saying much, his focus locked onto the mess beneath the sink. But despite the quiet, the energy in the room was anything but still. I could feel it, thick, charged, lingering between us like something waiting to ignite. Every now and then, I caught him sneaking glances at me, quick and subtle, as though he thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. I noticed everything. It amused me the way he tried to mask it, how he kept his hands busy, his gaze dipping toward his tools a little too quickly whenever I shifted in his peripheral vision. I found myself filling the silence, throwing out small, seemingly harmless questions about his work, his clients, how long he had been doing this. Anything to keep him talking, to keep his attention circling me, lingering just a little longer each time. He answered politely, his responses clipped but never dismissive. I could sense it, the tension tightening in his shoulders, the way he hesitated before responding, carefully measuring his words. I was making him uneasy, and I liked it. It had been too long since I had seen that effect on a man, since I had felt the slow, simmering thrill of being noticed, being wanted, even if it went unspoken. I stretched lazily, letting my body move with unhurried ease, leaning forward just slightly, just enough to bring me closer to his space, enough that I could watch his hands work with careful precision. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that knew what they were doing. "You're very thorough," I remarked, letting my voice dip into something a little too smooth, a little too knowing. Lucas exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening for a moment, before he glanced at me, something unreadable flickering behind his hazel eyes. "I take my job seriously," he said, his voice even, but there was a slight roughness to it now. I smiled, slow and deliberate, letting the moment stretch between us. I wanted him to feel it. And when I finally turned away, bringing my drink to my lips, I did so with a quiet satisfaction. I had gotten under his skin, and we both knew it. After what felt like hours, Lucas finally straightened, rolling his shoulders before wiping his hands on a rag. He exhaled, inspecting his work one last time before nodding in quiet satisfaction. "All right," he announced, his voice steady, professional. "That should do it. The pipe's fixed. You shouldn't have any more leaks." I pushed off the counter, taking a slow step toward him. "Thank you, Lucas," I murmured, my voice softer than I intended. "You really saved me today." He met my gaze briefly, nodding once before crouching to pack up his tools. But as I watched him, I realized something. I didn't want him to go. Not yet. "Let me help you clean up," he offered. His voice calm, neutral, but something about the way he said it felt different, as if he too was searching for an excuse to stay. He gestured toward the floor, where the remnants of the flood still pooled, reflecting the dim kitchen light. I smiled, reaching for a towel. I wouldn't say no to that. And so, we worked in near silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged. Every now and then, we brushed past each other, our bodies moving in close proximity, the warmth between us almost tangible. I felt it, the way his presence lingered too close, how his breath hitched, just barely, whenever our hands accidentally met. When we both reached for the same towel, our fingers collided, and this time neither of us pulled away. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and I saw it, the hesitation, the silent conflict brewing behind his eyes, the battle he was fighting with himself. I made the choice for him. I leaned in, just slightly, just enough. "Lucas," he murmured, my name slipping from his lips like something dangerous, something forbidden. His voice was low, rough, strained. I smiled, slow and knowing. "Yes?" He exhaled sharply, and in that moment I saw it. The exact second his resolve shattered, and then finally he gave in. The moment his lips met mine, a spark ignited deep within me, spreading like fire, unraveling something that had been coiled tight for far too long. It was reckless. It was dangerous, but it was inevitable. We collapsed onto the floor, limbs tangled, breath heavy, completely consumed by the fire we had ignited. Every thought, every hesitation, every whisper of doubt melted away, leaving behind nothing but pure, unfiltered need. This wasn't just reckless passion. It was something more, something raw. It was a hunger that had been left unsatisfied for far too long. A desperate, unspoken ache. To be seen, to be touched, to be wanted. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. But reality has a cruel way of creeping back in when the warmth begins to fade. The air around us shifted. Lucas sat up first, running a hand through his damp curls, his breath still uneven. I watched him, my chest rising and falling rapidly, waiting, no, needing him to say something, anything, but he didn't. Instead, he reached for his phone. A frown tugged at my lips. Confusion prickled at the back of my neck. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice laced with the remnants of our indulgence. He turned the screen toward me, and my stomach plummeted. A video of us. Every kiss, every touch, every forbidden moment captured in perfect, damning detail. A cold wave of horror crashed over me. "Lucas," I whispered, my throat tightening. What is this?" His expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "It's insurance," he said simply, as if that single word could explain away everything. I blinked, my mind scrambling to keep up. "Insurance?" Slowly he stood, buttoning up his uniform, adjusting the collar like he was getting ready to leave. Like he could just walk out of here unbothered while I sat there drowning in realization. "I need money, Evelyn," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket with infuriating ease. His tone was disturbingly casual, detached. "And you're going to help me get it." My breath caught. "You're blackmailing me?" He shrugged, his lips twitching into something that might have been a smirk if it weren't for the weight of his words. "I prefer to call it an arrangement." I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. "You give me what I need," he continued smoothly, "and your husband never sees this video." Dread curled inside me like a serpent tightening around my ribs. My husband. Suddenly the game I thought I was playing felt like something else entirely. I had thought I was in control, that I was the one toying with danger. But I had miscalculated. I had been the hunter, and now I was the prey. Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and unrelenting, but I refused to let them fall. I had walked into this willingly. I had chased the thrill, played the game, pushed the boundaries of what was forbidden, and now I was paying the price. My voice was hollow when I finally spoke. "How much?" Lucas named a figure that made my chest tighten, my stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't impossible, but it was far more than I could access without raising suspicions. "You have until tomorrow," he said, his voice infuriatingly calm as he snapped his toolbox shut. The quiet click echoed through the room, final and absolute. "If I don't hear from you, your husband will—" A lump lodged itself in my throat. I swallowed against the panic rising inside me, my mind racing, frantically searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. I had thought I was the one in control, that I was the one setting the rules, dictating the terms. I had been a fool. Lucas stepped toward the door, pausing just as his fingers brushed the handle. He glanced back at me, his eyes steady, unreadable. "See you soon, Evelyn." And with that, he was gone. The kitchen, once filled with tension and heat, now felt impossibly quiet. The air around me was thick with the weight of my mistakes. I had played with fire, and now I was burning alone.